Good afternoon, everyone. I am Trustee Dan McLean, Chair of the Finance, Budget, and Enrollment Committee. Today is Tuesday, March 4th, and I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome the committee members, trustees, staff, and members of the public. At this time, we will begin with the land acknowledgement. I ask that if you're able, that everyone please stand. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas, of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Miigwech. Thank you. Trustees have had an opportunity to review the agenda. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move forward. It's my understanding that there's no delegations for tonight. Thank you. So we will begin with our first staff report for consideration today is item 4, which is school-based staff allocation for the 2025-2026 school year, teachers and support staff. You'll find that on page 1 of the agenda. Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you. And through the chair, good evening, trustees. We are bringing forward this evening the school-based staffing report as indicated for recommendation for approval to board tomorrow evening. This report is coming at this time, which is a usual time for it, due to the work required by central staff and by principals in order to ultimately meet collective agreement timelines. And so this is, again, this is really the first big step of the budget, but it comes early and at this time because of those timelines. As a reminder, this report only includes school-based staffing or staffing that is allocated directly to schools. It does not include central staff, even if they work directly with students in schools. So again, it's just those that are allocated directly to schools. There's been a significant amount of work that has gone into providing these recommendations this evening, and I would like to thank the Staff Allocation Committee, which is made up of over 20 staff that include senior team members, budget staff, people and culture staff, and staff who are directly impacted by the allocation. For example, special education staff, facilities staff, and other program staff. I would specifically like to acknowledge Lori Moore, Mark Ellis, and Craig Snyder for helping to lead the committee through this very intensive and deliberate process. The staff recommendations are based on a thorough review of regulations, for example, class sizes, benchmarks provided by the ministry, collective agreements, funding, and the needs of the system. As I indicated, there's a significant amount of work that has gone into providing these recommendations, and the recommendations are supported by this committee. The committee has been meeting very regularly since the fall, using projected enrollments from planning for 25-26. School-based staffing is mostly based on enrollment, and therefore when enrollment decreases, staffing numbers also decrease. It's also important to note that the enrollment decreased by almost 1,000 students in the current year from the projections to the actual count in October. Therefore, the number of school-based staffing in the system is actually lower than the budget for the 2024-25, again, based on need. An example is special education support staff. Although the budget for 24-25 and the number in the report for 24-25 says 2803, the number of staff currently in the system is 2,787.5. So though it looks like a reduction in staffing, it is actually maintaining the current staffing levels. And that is the case in many of these situations. I also want to remind trustees that we're at the very beginning of the budget process. We still have approximately 3.5 months left before the final budget is due to the ministry. We can always add staff, but it is very challenging and sometimes impossible to reduce staffing once decisions are made. And it does, when we add staff at this time, it does take away some of our options in working towards a balanced budget. So I would ask trustees to consider the thought and the work that has gone into providing these numbers. I would ask trustees to consider the deficit that we are in, the commitment expected from the ministry for the deficit recovery program, and the fact that this is not the last opportunity to add staff. So with that, I thank you and we'll turn to Executive Officer Ellis to present the report.
Thank you very much, and good evening, trustees, and through the chair. The school-based staff allocation report for 25-26 is presented tonight for approval at the board meeting tomorrow for schools to receive their school staff allocation after the March break. This will allow system leaders to prepare their school organizations and timetables to meet staffing timelines. School-based staffing accounts for approximately 65% of the board's budget. Staffing recommendations are based on enrollment projections from planning department to ensure sufficient staff to meet class size regulations and collective agreement parameters. Since these projections are made 6 months before the school year begins, we will hold back a portion of the allocation to adjust if actual enrollment differs. Holdbacks include 3% of designated early childhood educators, 2% of elementary teachers, and 2% of secondary teachers. Additionally, this report includes the recommended benchmark allocations and the increased vice principal allocations based on last week's finance, budget, enrollment, and committee motion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The information is presented tonight for approval to align with a well-planned staffing process that meets all collective agreement and ministry mandated timelines. The next milestone in this is distributing discrete staffing allocations to schools after March break. Next slide, please. This slide outlines major milestones through the process. During March, staff are working on determining staffing at the school level. In April, class timetables, teaching, and support requirements are finalized, and surplus staffing, if any, is finalized. Then the process of placements and transfers begins. This allows for sufficient time to ensure most of the staffing requirements are completed by the end of June or prior to the summer break. Next slide, please. School-based staffing follows ministerial guidelines on class sizes and is funded through the core education funding from the ministry. While the exact 25-26 funding amount is not yet available, we have projected TDSB's requirements based on the assumption of no major changes in the funding formulas. Next slide, please. Given the projections are made 6 months in advance, we continue a conservative approach to ensure staffing aligns with the actual enrollment and funding. To manage this, as stated earlier, 3% of designated early childhood educators, 2% of elementary teachers, and 2% of secondary teachers will be held back and released only if enrollment meets projections. Next slide. The school-based staffing report reflects traditional allocation process based on available funding, noting that a recommendation was made at the last week's FPEC, which adds VP allocations that are in addition to the staff calculated benchmark allocation. Next slide, please. This chart outlines allocation requirements for elementary teaching. While the budget last year does indicate a higher number of elementary teachers, as the 24-25 enrollment did not meet projections, the actual number of elementary teaching staff today is roughly equivalent to the 25-26 projected numbers. Next slide, please. And this slide is a breakdown of elementary profile teachers and is consistent when compared to last year's budget. Next slide. This chart outlines allocation requirements for secondary teaching. The 25-26 projection is slightly lower due to changes in immigration legislation. Next slide. The chart on this slide and the next show both central and school-based teacher allocations, which directly provide instruction to students in schools. There have been some in-year increases to some of these allocations due to increased student interest, and so these increases are reflected in the recommended FTE for next year. Next slide. Projected full-day kindergarten enrollment will continue to decline in 25-26, and therefore the number of full-day kindergarten classes is projected to decrease. The designated early childhood educators allocation is set to decrease proportionally. Next slide. Staff recommend a return to benchmark allocation level for vice principals. In 24-25, the board approved 20 additional elementary VPs and 8 additional secondary VPs, bringing the totals to 185 elementary VPs and 161 secondary VPs. If the February 27th FBEC motion is passed on March 5th, these additional positions will be built into the 25-26 staffing allocation. I would like to ask Ms. Zucker if she would like to add a comment to this slide.
Thank you, and through the chair. So just a reminder to trustees that during COVID, the board received one-time funding through the COVID Learning Recovery Fund, and that funding stopped at the end of 22-23. And in fact, when it was provided that year through the ministry communication, they indicated that school boards should plan for this funding to expire at the end of August 23-24. So as part of that funding, TDSB added additional vice principals. The budget since that time have added these positions back. So the current number of vice principals that are in our system right now do include these COVID funded positions that no longer have a funding source. The additional vice principals have not been included in the staff recommendation today, as the deficit recovery plan expectations by the ministry clearly indicated that positions funded by one-time funding should not be included in the budget unless there is an alternative funding source. So again, there's a couple of things here. One, we have funded based on the benchmarks that come from the ministry and allow us to determine the number of vice principals that our enrollment per school on a school-by-school basis generates. And 2, we already have done the work of allocating the existing number of principals. So the team has come together and looked at the 166.5 and the 153 and done some allocations accordingly. So if the motion were to pass, there would be additional work that's required in order to allocate those vice principals out. And again, we're not saying that this isn't appropriate. We're just asking trustees to consider the timing of when you provide that direction. And if that direction, when you consider all of the other options within the budget in order to come to a balanced position, if that would be the priority. In addition, I think it's important for staff to have an opportunity to consider if the vice principals are required, if there are additional or other supports that would be more appropriate. And again, give staff some time in order to do that work. And if as we get closer to further along in the budget process, if trustees do believe that we should be adding back positions, vice principals specifically, then we still have the opportunity to do so. So again, just want to honor the work that was done by the staff allocation committee, that has been done by the superintendents in order to consider the needs of each of the schools. And again, the recommendation that you see in this report is what the staffing allocation committee, based on the calculations and based on the funding, have been done, and it does tie back into the expectations of the deficit recovery plan.
Thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. Educational assistants are distributed to alternative attendance, caring and safe school programs, and the allocation has remained consistent with the prior year. Next slide. While there is a slight decrease evident when comparing against the budgeted planned special education support staff allocation, The actual number of special education support staff currently deployed in our system is 2,787.5. Staff are recommending that this remain at its current level to ensure student support remains consistent. Next slide, please. As indicated in the report, school-based office clerical is recommended to remain consistent with last year's budgeted allocation. Slide. The allocation of school-based safety monitors includes the continuation of 40 itinerant positions, which initially were added during the pandemic to ensure more caring adults in schools to support the mental health and well-being of students. Next slide, please. While the number of full-day kindergarten classes is projected to decrease, we are recommending the same allocation of lunchroom supervisors as last year. Should these lunchroom supervisor allocations not be needed for full-day kindergarten, they will shift to lunchroom supervisors to support students in grades 1 through 8. Next slide. As noted, aquatic staffing requirements will be determined through further discussions during the budget process, with a projected allocation required by April 11th of this year. Next slide. Caretaking allocations are primarily based on the use square footage of operating buildings, and this allocation includes caretaking staff at non-school sites. Next slide. This is a summary representation of allocations as presented, representing a budgetary expense of approximately $2.5 billion and 25,249 FTE. Next slide. This slide demonstrates the revised allocation based on the FPEC meeting last week, so that you can see the difference in both costing and FTE. Next slide. As indicated earlier, this is the first step in a multi-stage interdependent process to ensure that school-based needs are determined based on the projected enrollment, and all staffing adjustments are made in a fair, consistent, and respectful fashion in line with the collective agreement requirements. Next slide. This concludes our overview of the report presented by staff, and we are happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Executive Officer Ellis. Before we get into questions, can I ask trustees that joined late to please share that you joined the meeting so the record can be accurate?
Trustee Lee's here.
Trustee Yar's here.
Trustee Patel here.
Trustee King here.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from trustees? I invite you to put your request in the chat, and we'll monitor the online chat. Trustee Williams, do you have questions?
Thank you. And through the chair, can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Thank you. So I just want to, first of all, thank staff for this report and all the work that went into preparing it. So I'm going to start with a comment. Really, I'm going to start with the comment / sharing of concern that I've received from a parent. A parent at one of our congregated sites at Beverly School. So through the chair, if you'll just indulge me, I'll share. I'm redacting the name of the student and just include inserting my son, my child. So this parent at our congregated site, Beverly School, writes, I'm a parent of a 4-year-old student in junior kindergarten at Beverly Street School. My son has Maher syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that affects multiple systems in his body. The symptoms of this condition include short stature, skeletal abnormalities, joint stiffness, hearing loss, heart and lung abnormalities, and several other challenges that require specialized care and attention. Beverly School is a place where my son receives the support he needs to thrive in a safe and inclusive learning environment. My son's syndrome is ultra rare, and he is one of only 6 people in Canada with it. The parent goes on to describe their concerns with what the parent community there perceived as possible staffing reductions that might come to their school. Parents were reassured in a way that we're at the beginning of this process and no final decisions had been made. I'm going to go on with what the parents shared. Beverly School is a world-renowned, highly specialized learning environment that serves students with complex and often severe disabilities. Many students, like my son, attend Beverly because they are underserved by special needs programs in mainstream schools, or because there are no mainstream schools that can accommodate their specific needs. Reducing staffing at Beverly would be particularly harmful because of the high level of care required by many students, many of whom are medically fragile, such as my son. The parent goes on to describe, how their child thrives. And I hear that word repeated again and again at this congregated site in our system, one of the few that serve K-8 students. They thrive in this environment. So I wanted to share that. And the question I had for staff, I've heard throughout the day parents expressing to me, we realize this is an annual process, the staffing process. But for those parents and families of those students are most vulnerable in our system, medically fragile, is there a feasibility of some other parallel or other mechanism where they don't have this annual, what they perceive as a threat to staffing, as a threat to the supports available for, again, I'll repeat, the most vulnerable students in our system, medically fragile students who thrive at a site like this. So at one of our few congregated schools. So that's my question to staff. And I've heard through the presentation a couple of times, and maybe you'll also confirm after you answer the question, that staffing for special education is not being reduced in this proposal that's in front of us today. Thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll just start and then I will ask Associate Director Sarisco to step in, because I fear that there may be some misinformation for that school in particular about what's happening. Just like all of our teachers for our classroom teachers, and specifically special education classroom teachers, self-contained classes, we do look at the enrollment, and then our enrollment determines the number of teachers that are required. So to say that there's not a reduction in special education staffing, I just want to be clear, there is a reduction in our special education teachers in self-contained schools based on the enrollment, the specific enrollment. But at the same time, we are keeping the levels for special education support staff the same as it currently is, even though there is a decrease in enrollment. So I just would like Associate Director Sarisco to maybe speak to the concern that you started with and address what may, again, be a misunderstanding of what's happening.
Thank you very much. And through the chair to trustees, good evening. Let me begin by echoing the high level of care that our staff put in place for our students with complex needs. Beverly is one of our most treasured locations of supporting students with complex needs. And I can hear the passion in your voice, Trustee Williams, and I want to reassure you, the parent that corresponded to you, as well as all of our parents with children who are supported at Beverly, that their needs are being met and will be met to the same level that next year that is occurring now. The safety plans, the detail that is outlined in the IEPs, the careful planning for transitions for each of those students will be maintained. You asked specifically if there would be a parallel process so that the staffing and the organization at the school could be untouched from year to year. Beverly is not dissimilar from our other schools in that our administrative teams need to look at the enrollment for the year. They have the benefit and the support of our coordinators and our consultants who actually review each of the student profiles in depth to understand who may be graduating and who through the IPRC process is seeking placement at Beverly. And once those decisions are made, the administrator together with the special education team are going to be considering the placements of students within classes. Their age is going to be a consideration, and their medical needs are going to be a consideration to determine which classroom teacher is assigned to them, as well as the support staff. They may have a claim to have more than 2 staff also assigned to them to be making sure that their needs are being met at all times. Currently and next year, the class sizes are determined by the Education Act as well as TDSB expectations, and those class caps are met. Actually, each of the classes are under-enrolled from what is permissible within the Education Act. And we do that very intentionally to be supporting the students to an even higher degree. So I want to reassure you that our student needs are being met. It's regrettable that our parents were concerned, and I'm glad that there has been some reassurance. But to have a parallel process that just keeps the school at status quo would not be possible, Trustee Williams, because the principal does need to be thinking about the new configuration of students to best meet their needs. And that's what the principal is undergoing now, together with the consultants and the coordinators. So we'll continue to be outreaching to the administrator and to parents to offer reassurance through time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And through the chair, those are my questions and comments at this time.
Thank you, Trustee Williams. Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. And thank you to staff for preparing this. And I know I know this is a really difficult process. I have a few questions. And I too wanted to ask about special education staffing allocations. It looked throughout the report in the areas of elementary teachers, secondary teachers, and also special education support staffs that there were reductions from the approved 24-25 levels. And so I wanted to get further information on this. I heard said in the report that it is around reduced enrollment, but we have overwhelming needs in these areas. So just wondering why we wouldn't be proposing to keep at the levels that we currently have. Thanks very much.
So thank you. Through the chair, I'll start, and then I'll ask anybody that would like to add to please do so. As I indicated for the support staff, when we look at the benchmark funding, it actually came out to less. I think it was $27.74. And so if we were just going based on purely the calculation that the formula would spit out, we would be looking at 2774. We know that last year was 2804, but as I indicated, and through the revised estimates, we actually decreased that amount because based on need and based on the decrease in enrollment, we had only allocated 2787.5. And so that is the proposal that you see here. So it actually is status quo for the support staff that is currently in the system. With regards to teachers, again, we, as Associate Director Sarisco indicated, we do look at the needs of the students, consider other factors as well, including, again, their medical needs and age, that sort of thing, to determine the configuration. And by doing that, we sometimes have an increase in the number of self-contained classes that we need, and sometimes we have a decrease. And we do expect a decrease this year, partly based on enrollment, partly based on the configuration of the classes that are required to support the needs of the students. I'm just wondering if anybody would like to add anything further.
Thank you. And through you, I would just also comment to trustees that the TDSB has a projection for continued decline enrollment, and that same trend is also seen for students with special education needs. Trustee Earhart, so to be maintaining our level of deployed staff right now is considered positive, and we're thankful for that, maintaining what is currently allocated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I will say that in community, we frequently hear the need for additional special education support staff. So I'm still trying to understand why, when we had decided to allocate 2804 last year through board decision, we still only have 2787.5. I'm hearing that was a deliberate decision and it wasn't due to the roles going unfilled. Could I get a further explanation of that? And thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair, it would be based, Trustee Earhart, on the needs in the system as far as enrollment and the allocation that would be determined through the central staffing team to be meeting the enrollment needs of students with special education needs school by school.
Okay, thanks very much. And through the chair, we have enrollment needs, but we consistently hear that the special education supports offered are insufficient. And so I'm wondering why we wouldn't have sought, if we had approved staffing positions, why we would not have sought to have the extra supports available in the system, given the frequency, at least that we hear in community, of the need for these supports in regular classrooms, to increase the frequency for regular classroom visits, as well as in congregated sites. Thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair, Trustee Earhart, we always are needing to be very mindful that the needs in the system ebb and flow through time. And we always need to be having approved staff at the ready to be deployed should we see increased enrollment or placement of students through the IPRC process, as well as welcoming new students to our board. So that at any given time, we would be having a small holdback of staff ready to be dispatched to an administrator when they're welcoming a new student.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, I also wanted to ask around elementary teacher librarians. I noted there was a proposed reduction by 8 staff of the current elementary teacher librarian FTEs. I'm wondering if we can hear more about that rationale, and thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was a change in the funding model when the core education came out, and the supplement that was sort of library staffing was removed as we moved to core education funding that was previously there.
Okay, thank you. So I'm to understand through the chair that that is because the province is no longer funding teacher librarian roles to the same levels that they were previously. Am I correct in that understanding?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, a supplementary library staffing component limitation was taken off in core education funding.
Okay, thank you. Although that is just so frustrating and unfortunate. I also wanted to ask through the chair around the enrollment projections for kindergarten and early elementary years. It appeared to me just to be so many ECEs, ECE, and early year elementary teacher staff reductions. And those are just knowing that we're still taking in children that were born in pandemic emergency years. Just wondering for more detail around the projections, and also emphasizing that we're still hearing great need in those years. Thank you.
Through the chair, I think we're just doing a quick calculation, but I will say that it is purely based on enrollment and the requirement for ECEs in classes greater than 15. So it actually is based on our projected enrollment. We will look at it on a school by school basis, and part of the holdback will be allocated accordingly. But again, when we're looking at the number that's there, it's not the actual number that's currently deployed, as the number that's currently deployed is based on the revised enrollment. So the budget went down based on our current numbers are already reduced. I would say the majority of the reduction is in the current year, and then there is a slight decrease for next year. But I will ask Lori to speak to this, please.
Thanks. And through the chair, our kindergarten enrollment projection for 25-26 has gone down approximately 700 students compared to 24-25 projections. We forecast our DECs at 90% of our kindergarten classes, and the number of our kindergarten classes has decreased as enrollment has gone down as well. Therefore, there is a decline in the number of DECs proportionally to the number of FDK classes that we're projecting.
Okay, thanks very much. And through the chair, just for clarification, how many of our current ECEs then are funded directly by the province based on this allocation? And are we proposing to change the numbers in our system beyond that? Thank you. Oh, should I clarify through the chair? My apologies.
No, they're negotiating, and they're trying to figure out who gets the honor of responding to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the report of 1,042.5 is at the ministry benchmark level based on the enrollment projections we have.
Thank you, through the chair. That's the ministry benchmark level. And so that's next year's projected. This year as well, the number that we have currently is the ministry benchmark level. Just to be clear through the chair. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, I did have some questions around the elementary teachers, just trying to understand what is happening. And this is me in terminology, trying to understand what fits with what I know, just similar to ministry benchmarks, just making sure I understand what aligns with the chart I'm seeing. I'm wondering what's happened with the early screening specialist teachers, and I hope I have that name right, and also with this student support, the student support the positions for student support funding. Do I have those correct? And just wondering if we could help clarify which lines in elementary teachers are covered by those. Thank you.
Through the chair, the early reading intervention teachers has sort of gone back and forth of being in our board report and not, given it is very clearly defined now as central teaching. It is not in our school-based board report this year. It will be part of central teaching as it comes forward.
Thank you. And through the chair, when we get the report for central position, early intervention forms part of that, just to be clear. And this is my learning about what's in what. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trustee Art. Trustee Lee.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this working. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the comprehensive report. I just have one quick question on the slide on the elementary teachers, where you gave a breakdown on the FTE plan from 2024 to 2026. On there, the learning opportunities line from grade 4 to 8 went from 115 headcounts to 145. Can I just get a breakdown? Maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but can I just get a breakdown again on what the reason for that increase is?
Through the chair, we've had a revised way to look at our learning opportunities allocation in elementary for the 25-26 school year. In the past, these have been 0.5 classroom allocations. As we have moved towards greater inclusion in special education and the removal of our homeschool program in the last few years, and the reduction in the number of 0.5 classrooms in ESL, self-contained, and LEAP, we are looking to have a more inclusive set up for our learning opportunity. That way students are with their teacher all day, not with one teacher for half the day and then a larger class for the other half of the day.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, what does that actually mean when it comes to the new setup? Can you give me an outline on which schools are getting these learning opportunity staff?
Through the chair, learning opportunities allocations are considered for schools in the first 200 ranking of LOI. It is dependent on their share of the enrollment in grades 4 to 8 of those schools. So there are schools that have a very small grade 4 and 5, they're a K to 5 school, and a small grade 4 or 5 enrollment projection. They would not meet the threshold of garnering an additional teacher. Schools with a bit larger projections, particularly schools that may be K to 8, they may look to garner an allocation. What the impact of this is those individual schools will have the opportunity to have a lower class size average to start the school year. That is something that is put in place to assist with smaller class sizes basically at the startup. They are still considered for additional teachers come reorg, but the learning opportunities teacher is to lower class size at those schools that have an opportunity to garner a share of the enrollment of 4 to 8 in the top 200 LOI.
So through Mr. Chair, that's 1.4 more teachers per school. And how much does that lower the average class sizes of these schools?
Through the chair, the impact on class size differs depending on the overall enrollment of the school and how many teachers they have. In average, I could look that up, but it's typically 1 or 2 students per classroom lower in larger schools.
And I'm trying to understand the impacts, right? Just because when we think about our overall student population coming down, and this one particular line item going up while everyone else is coming down as well. I'm not sure if I understand the true impact on everyone else in the system. So I'd like to get a clarification from staff on how this will affect all the other schools and other students.
Through the chair, I would ask Executive Officer Snyder to respond, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this will help us achieve our class average of 24.5 by having lower classes in ESL.
Sorry, through Mr. Chair, I'm not sure that's the answer I was looking for. Right now, in a non-first or in a non-model school elementary school, a classroom would have anywhere between 28 to 32 students to make it work. In one of the elementary schools that I represent, there are currently 5 classes of 35 students each. Okay, so that's 5 classes of 35 students each. Staff this year could have assigned one more teacher to bring that down to create one more class, but instead we assigned that headcount somewhere else. So we have an entire school where every staff member is struggling, every student is struggling, and no one can understand why we made these decisions. And when I look at allocations like this, when we're making decisions over and above what the province has actually intended on their funding formula to improve staffing for a specific group of schools while making every other school struggle, I can't help but to think about that one particular school that I represent where every teacher is struggling, every student is struggling, every parent is unhappy. So how do we address that? And why are we doing this? And why are we creating inequities in other parts of the city to address, certain schools that are already receiving additional allocation and funding?
Through the chair, I'm going to respond initially to process around class size average, and perhaps someone else can speak to another piece. But our class size average is mandated by the ministry for grades 4 to 8 to be 24.5 on account dates selected by the board in the month of September. We then report on that to the ministry in October. Class size average takes into account a number of different classes that exist in grade 4 to 8, including alternative schools, French immersion, middle immersion, and regular grade 4 to 8 classes. In terms of a system average of 24.5, one must take into account that we have some very small classes, not related to LOI at all, and very small programs that garner small classes, sometimes in the range of 10 to 15 students. Those are then offset by class sizes that are larger than 24.5, so that we're able to achieve the average of 24.5 or better. In terms of identifying learning opportunities index schools that have something, they have it to start off the year, and it may mean they have less disruption when it comes to September reorg. But when we get to September reorganization, we do look at every single school in the system in terms of what needs to be adjusted to help us achieve our required 24.5 class size average.
Sorry, through Mr. Chair, I appreciate the education on how averages work, and I have a very clear understanding of how we got to that math. But we can have 2 classes of 24.5 each to get a 24.5 average, or we can have 1 class of 50 and another class of 1 to get to that same average. We're overloading one classroom in some parts of the city so that classrooms in other parts of the city can have a lower number of averages. And I see that in real life, and I hear that feedback in real life. I appreciate the work that central staff is doing, but you don't face the parents and you don't see the real struggles in each classroom when you have an elementary school that has 5 classes of 35 students. And I feel like we need to face that and address it, right? And not hide behind the math. So I don't feel like I have a good answer and explanation from staff on why we're allowing this to happen.
So through the chair, I would expect that the part of it is based on our multi-year strategic plan and supporting the expectations that we increase our achievement results, and knowing that in those schools, and Dr. Cameron's not online, but in my multiple discussions with him, he did indicate that income was the biggest determiner of outcome. And so I believe that using our commitments under the multi-year strategic plan, that this decision was made. But I understand what you're saying, because when we're looking at an average, if we are lowering class size in these schools, then we would be increasing it in others potentially.
And thank you, through Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, but I don't agree that a multi-year strategic plan specifically asks us to make education worse for some students and better for others. And I understand income has an impact, but that doesn't mean our students who live in other areas don't have their struggles. And it doesn't mean that other students deserve worse education. And I don't think any student deserves a classroom of 35 students with one teacher, and our staff definitely don't deserve that. So I don't feel like there is a good plan to address the concerns that I'm hearing from the communities that I'm seeing in our schools. So I find it very difficult to accept this plan right now, because I don't know what's behind it. So I appreciate all the hard work that staff has done, but I can't support this right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. At this time, can I get some trustees that have joined late to confirm their presence in the meeting so the record can...
Trustee Shan here.
Thank you.
Trustee Rajwani.
Thank you, Trustee Rajwani. Okay, that's great. And we will now go to Trustee King.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'm still processing a few of the comments that we heard from Trustee Lee. And, I think at the beginning of this process, every year we all lament about this position that we're in. And of course, ideally we'd be in a place where we're funding everybody to their needs adequately. And, we're not having to deal with all the many varied presentations that the underfunding causes in every neighborhood, in different schools, in different ways. And I don't believe the conversation should be pitting those strains against one another, but doing that work to continue figuring out how we more adequately get the needs of everybody served. And I know that feels a little bit in vain right now, considering where we are, but I had to say that before I begin. So I do have two questions for staff. Staff noted in the presentation that, as with every year, we begin this process at this time because this allows the planning to happen for the commitments that need to be made for staffing at the school level beginning after the March break. But staff also stressed that this is not the final or only opportunity to make additions to school-based staff. And I was just wondering if you can please remind me if there are thresholds for additions with any of these categories of staff. Is there a point at which in this process for either teachers or for any of the support staff at which we lose the opportunity to make additions?
Through the chair, just clarifying, you're asking, is there any point in the budget process that prevents us from adding staff?
Correct, yes.
No, there's no collective agreement timelines regarding adding staff. The only challenge may be if we're looking at different configurations, that sort of thing. And sometimes adding staff does create some roll down impacts on who is added or who is the actual successful candidate in the position. But no, we can add staff at any point at any time.
Through the chair, thank you for that. And then one other question. I just wanted some clarity around the library allocation that Trustee Earhart had asked about earlier. When we look at the numbers for 24-25 and then the recommendation for 25-26, that decrease that we see from 221.5 to 213.5, is that difference based on enrollment, or is that difference based on core funding, a change in core funding?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's both the enrollment change as well as the funding change taken into account.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me then.
Sorry, is that all your questions, Trustee King?
No,
Okay.
actually, sorry. No, actually, if sorry, Executive Officer Snyder can just expand. How is it a representative of a change in core funding if we don't yet have that funding? I think I'm just not following.
Thank you. And through the
Difference.
chair, when core education came out this year, they did take away that restriction on the library teacher supplemental amount. So it is a change that happened this year that we're reflecting in next year's budget.
Okay, in addition to an enrollment change or projected change.
I think she's looking for confirmation.
Sorry, what was the confirmation requested? Just
Just that number is reflective of the core ed funding and an enrollment difference as well.
that is correct.
Okay,
Through you, Chair.
thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Trustee King. Trustee Earhart, are you in a position to take the chair?
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, can someone, I'm sure we've been told, and it's evading me at the moment, can someone share why we think our kindergarten projections are down so dramatically this year?
Through you, Madam Chair, the birth rates we're seeing lower as we move through time in the general population. So our enrollments of incoming cohorts of JKSK are lower because primarily due to the birth rate. There is some changes in the demographics within the city, within immigration patterns and things of that as well. But if your planning was here with us, they would say one of the big factors is the birth rate continues to lower.
And I just want to add through the chair that you're looking at the difference from the budget to the budget. Our projections for the current year were actually, the actuals were actually lower by, I'm not sure if staff has that exact number, but there was a bigger change in the current year than is projected from now until next year. Through the chair, if we could provide those numbers, that would be helpful. Again, because we're comparing budget to budget, but we have a period in there, which is now, which is our actual enrollment, and that actual enrollment is quite a bit lower than what our projection was for the current year.
Okay, I'll go and maybe we can, I'll move on and we can kind of swing back when you figured that out. Through the chair, online courses, the government, integrated every student should take two. Families have the opportunity to opt out. And it's my understanding that we have a number of families and students who opt out. Since the classes for the online subjects are higher and we have more students that are opting out, is the core funding factor in those differences so that our class sizes in theory aren't higher than they might be?
So through the chair, in the funding, classes for in-person classes for secondary are funded at 23-1. And our online classes are funded at 30-1. And the ministry does assume that every student is taking 2 courses. So if we do not have every secondary student taking 2 online courses, then we are actually underfunded based on our current usage of online.
So just to follow up then through the chair, is that how we get to the situations, or is that partially how we get to the situations that Trustee Lee was describing in having pockets of higher class, particularly maybe at secondary level, where we're doing averages, we're applying math that suggests that that they're going to be in these larger classes, and the reality is they opt out, and when they opt out, then the student ratios are different. And if the province doesn't adapt with funding, does that not result in higher class sizes in some of our secondary school situations?
Through the chair, our secondary class size average requirement is 23 or lower for in-person classes. That is why we'll see we transfer some of our e-learning teachers to in-person so that we're able to comply with that. Our collective agreements also have fluctuations in class caps that are there, which are very different from the class size average. So we have to maneuver within all of those pieces to get to our 23 average. The OSSTF workload accord does have classes that are higher, but they also have caps identified, and those are different at our schools depending on what their divisor is for their staffing. But in terms of e-learning, we do have a challenge without enough students taking e-learning, or without 2 credits for every student graduating with their OSSD. We have to transfer teachers from e-learning, and technically that's at a loss because a 30-1 ratio, converting a teacher to 23-1, you're only getting a 0.7 of that teacher to carry over funding wise.
Okay, thank you. And some of my colleagues have talked about the special education support staff allocation, and I too must admit that, so I'm going to have to, through the chair, I'm going to have to wander into here as well. Now, I certainly understand that the number of students that would be requiring special education supports are going to fluctuate from year to year. But do I understand that we had planned for 2,803 and we're currently at 2,787.5, and we're going to maintain that going forward. That's what the budget calls for. But are the number of students requiring the extra support lower than we had projected? Like, I understand that the number is going to fluctuate, but we budgeted for a little over 2,800 staff, and we're 15.5 below. And I'm wondering if we had students leave our system that we didn't anticipate. Students didn't join at a rate that they traditionally join our board. Like, I'm not understanding, because we do such a good job of projections. I'm not understanding how we thought we'd need more students in need of support, and then in the end, we didn't need them.
Thank you. And through the chair, we, as I mentioned, Trustee McLean, we do always have an in-year holdback in case there are fluctuations to which we need to respond. What I can share with you is that there are approximately 3,500 IEPs fewer in our system currently than there were last year. And understanding we're just in March, so there's still a few months of school remaining, but the trends for our enrollment decreasing also are being seen within the special education area.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, it's been my experience in the time I've been on the board that I get a number of calls from community, usually in September and October, usually around kindergarten classes, and that the system, we will get students that we believe ultimately might benefit from special education supports. But as they enter our system, they aren't appropriately assessed necessarily. And so there's quite often a discrepancy between that which the teachers might benefit like the reality in the classroom is that our needs, particularly at the kindergarten levels, our needs are quite often outweigh the amount of the support staff, special education support staff, because we didn't know that these students were going to need these supports. So if our numbers were down, was there not an opportunity to, hire to budget and then allocate these extra supports to support the students and classrooms in need in our system?
I'm talking to myself.
Yeah, believe you might be muted there. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Trustee McLean, we have a duty to be supporting students at all times. So while we're awaiting a student to receive an identification perhaps, or that we are still learning about their profile, we need to be providing the support necessary for them. So I want to reassure you in that regard. We're not waiting. The coordinators, consultants, our special education staff have a very strong pulse on our system, and that is through our administrators reaching out, through our support team meetings, but also just through conversation when there is a student of need. We do not hesitate to dispatch additional support when required. That will often be in regards to support staff. We will dispatch staff for allocation for classes. I'll say less regularly because that would be through the IPRC process that has a regular rhythm. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is understanding that students' exceptionality. We're going to be looking at classes that are close to their home. We're going to be filling classes to that cap that I talked about earlier. When we are seeing students who are in need of an ISP, we would open a class in a location, even if that is mid-year, because we have students in need. So I think you're wondering is why have you not pushed out all of the staffing that was approved through budget? And again, it is looking at the ebb and flow over the course of the year. It's not that we're wanting to excessively hold back. We need to be making sure that we have enough staff to assign to meet the needs as the months go by. I hope that provides some reassurance. I'm appreciating through the questioning from our trustees the passion and the dedication that you have to be supporting students with special education needs, and it is obviously always welcome. Again, the numbers that are presented do represent what is out in the system currently. So I think that is a good position to be in, particularly when we know projected enrollment is continuing to be forecast to decline next year. I hope that helps somewhat. Thank you.
It does. Thank you. And through the chair, can you provide me the approximate waiting time for assessment and evaluation currently for the students that are entering our system?
Thank you for the question. If I could take that back, and if I have an answer for you in the next part of the conversation, I'll let you know, Trustee McLean, but I want to answer with accurate information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Erhard, I'll take the chair back. Thank you.
Through the chair, we just wanted to go back to your question about JK. So our enrollment actually decreased almost 1,000 students from 23-24 to 24-25. And we had projected about a 700 decrease, 700 pupil decrease. So the actuals were even less than we had projected by about 300. And then we're projecting a further almost 400 pupil decrease next year. So that 400 is better than the 1,000 that actually happened last year to the current year. But it is still, we are still projecting a decrease for next year.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trustee Erhard, I'll take back the chair. Thank you. And it only seems appropriate to therefore give you the floor. So you're up for our first round of questionings in round 2.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't have too many more questions. I did also see, and through the chair was confused a bit about the e-learning staffing roles in the secondary teachers being proposed for increase when we're hearing that students are not enrolled as much in those. I see there's a note here. I'm wondering if I could get staff clarification on that, just to walk me through it again. And thank you very much.
So through the chair, I'll start with anecdotally. We are expecting more students to move towards the e-learning, taking those 2 courses as expected by the ministry, partly one because of funding and partly because to prepare students for post-secondary, many university courses now, for example, there's a hybrid, some courses are offered in person, some courses are offered online. So we do think that it prepares students more for post-secondary or for the future. So we are seeing more students and we're providing more opportunities for students to do e-learning. And we do expect the number of students taking those e-learning courses to increase. But I will look to my colleagues if they want to add anything further.
One of the other changes in e-learning is the ministry has been phasing in funding over 4 years, and this is at the end of the 4-year phase-in that does increase. Their anticipation of 25% of students taking the e-learning credit is one thing that is at full implementation at this point in time. The other piece is our team that looks after e-learning has been looking at some of the barriers that students have faced to enroll in e-learning to make sure that they can get through cleaner. It's in their My Blueprint at this point this year. It was just added just in time last year, so they've had more time to talk about it. And there have been some schools exploring opportunities to offer e-learning courses as well. So there has been an increase year over year in the number of students that have taken e-learning. However, there is still, we're much below what the expectation is of 25% of all students.
And Trustee McLean, when please cue me in to answer your question when appropriate.
Trustee Erhard, we'll let you continue, and then before we'll get the answer to that question later.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So thank you for the responses. They're helpful, though. I continue to be frustrated. I know we're in a virtual meeting. I recognize that hybrid is part of our lives, but I also know that the cohort of students that are going through the system right now experienced unprecedented interruptions, and I do think it's so important that they interact in person as young people as much as possible for all their courses, and to learn how to interact in person through a variety of topics. And so to me, it continues to be unfortunate, but I appreciate the clarification. I'm going to just jump back to one other quick question through the chair. In our last special FBAC, in addition to elementary and secondary vice principals that were approved by committee for add back or proposed add back at this meeting, social workers and child and youth workers were also proposed to be added back. I just wanted to confirm that we would see those through central staffing. We're not seeing those through this allocation. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. And in fact, they have already, they were maintained, again, due to, based on need and based on the Auditor General indicating an expectation for increased support to mental health.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've asked a lot of questions about ECEs and also special education staffing. I do have proposed amendments to move. I did want to say for special education, I did want to get staff thoughts. My proposal would be to add back to the exact numbers as we had last year in all categories. But I say that feeling very strongly that where we have the ability, we should seek to increase whatever supports we can offer in the system. I say that as someone that's very well aware of how long students are waiting on the Ontario Autism Support Waitlist, often through their entire elementary career. And so, and based on what I am hearing in community about the extraordinary need. So I continue to have a hard time understanding how we could not, how our system cannot benefit from those staffing roles. And so would appreciate hearing staff comment and if you would envision a different way of structuring that support. Rather, to me, I can't envision reducing the staff from what was proposed for allocation last year, but would you envision it organized differently? And thank you.
So through the chair, I will ask either Executive Superintendent Palmer or Associate Director Sarisco to respond, please.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, just a point of clarification to you, Trustee Earhart. When you say configured differently, can you tell me what you mean by that? Because our classes are, the class caps are determined by the Education Act. So are you meaning support staff? If you could just let me know your thinking a little bit.
Yes, thank you. And so through the chair, I saw through the report that there is a proposed reduction in elementary special education teachers, a proposed reduction in secondary special education teachers of 2, but still 2, and of a special education support staff. So across 3 categories. And so I am concerned about reductions because all I see and hear is increased need. And so I'm wondering what the staff response is to that. Perhaps you would wish to reconfigure because each increase, each proposed maintain has a budgetary implication. Would you envision a different configuration based on what you know of our system right now? And thank you.
See. Okay, thank you very much. Trustee Earhart, what I can assure you is that the report that is before you this evening and all reports go through a process of collaborative writing. So this report wasn't created by Senior Officer Craig Snyder and Associate Director Zucker without the involvement and eyes on for myself as well as Executive Superintendent Palmer. So we certainly share in the writing and the recommendations that are before the board this evening. I would feel remiss if I did not echo Associate Director's caution that she stated earlier as the Board of Trustees and individual trustees are thinking about putting motions to add back, whether that be vice principals or elementary teachers, whether that's for special education and what have you. We so appreciate and having a lifetime of passion for students with special education needs. I just want to reinforce my gratitude for the passion that each of you bring to be supporting our students with special education needs. We caution you to be having our best advice is to let the budget process go through time. As you see the options to balance put before you later through the cycle in March, you'll be able to weigh the options and the recommendations staff are putting before you, as well as your considerations of adding back to the areas where you feel the greatest needs present. And you'll be able to do that in a fulsome way in considering all of the options and the challenges before you. So, Trustee Ahern, I hope that's helpful. And again, staff just so very appreciate the thoughtful consideration you all bring to the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I had one last question about teacher librarians, and it's 8.0 staff. My understanding is through the chair, my understanding is teacher librarians are typically allocated in 0.5s. Is that to imply that 16 schools would lose access to teacher library resources? And thank you.
Through the chair, for the 23-24 school year, schools were no longer allocated 0.5 each for library. There was a graduated allocation developed due to a reduction at that time in our total library. So there are some schools that receive, many schools receive a 0.39 library allocation, and the impact of this reduction would see a 0.1 reduction to our 470 elementary schools. So those that receive 0.39 are looking at potentially a 0.38 next year.
Okay, thank you. So I'm to understand that we're cutting this very through the chair. The proposal that we're seeing is that the ministry cut will be spread across our elementary school. We won't see a loss of a specific, like we're not at that point of 0.5 resource anymore. It will be cut in deep fractions across every school. Thank you.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you, Trustee Ahern. Yeah. Did you want back on the list?
Yes, to introduce motion. Thank you.
I wasn't trying to talk you into it. I was just trying to inquire what you intended. So before we go to Trustee Lee, Associate Director Sarisco, if you had the update.
Certainly, and through you, Chair, the wait time for psychoeducational assessment can be up to 1 year. Trustee McLean, we take our break period, so the upcoming March break, as well as summer, to work alongside our psychoeducational consultants and to conduct as many assessments during that break time as possible. So we're looking forward to having many students assessed over this coming break. Thank you.
Thank you for the information. And with that, we will turn to Trustee Lee.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Sorry, my buttons weren't working. I just wanted to provide one point of clarity on your question or comment to the comment that I made earlier. The 35 student per class across 5 classrooms. This is an example that I've seen in elementary schools, as in JK to grade 5 schools, right? So students here cannot drop classes, and I understand what you're talking about when it comes to a secondary high school. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's all. Thank you. And that's all.
Sorry, was there a question in there, Trustee Lee?
No, I was just clarifying something that you had mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And before we go to Trustee Earhart in round 3, I'm going to pass the chair to Trustee Earhart again. Are you in position to
thank
take
you.
the chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And through you. Is it the finances team's position that you intend to go to SEAC and, like you do annually, and present to SEAC the projections and the staffing? Well, in theory, what will have been approved at that point, but the changes year over year to SEAC for their reaction?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. I've been invited to SEAC's next meeting in late March to present the financial projection that we presented to you. And I'll be providing an update from whatever the resolution at board tomorrow night is.
So through you, Madam Chair, so there will be an opportunity for trustees at a later date, depending on how those conversations, for those of us who are interested and would be inclined to attend that meeting and hear that feedback and hear the questions from SEAC, there would be an opportunity at a later date to for trustees to make any potential modifications in terms of adding, if after that conversation, trustees felt it was appropriate at that time. But if we add today, and then through the course of that conversation, we find that all of what we added may or may not be needed, then there would be a note, we don't have the ability to back up and undo that. But if we wait and let SEAC weigh in, before, there's still an abundance of time in this budget process for us to be able to add if it was the will of the board at that time.
I heard two questions there through you, Madam Chair. The first would be, as we say in our consultation document, any feedback we receive from the surveys, PIAC, SEAC, advisory committees, or our town halls, that feedback will be provided and report to the FBAC committee at the conclusion of our consultations. And to the second half of your question, yes, there will be time to add after SEAC, as Associate Director Zucker said earlier.
So we do have there'll be an abundance of time between now and until the budget is finalized and tied up with a bow in June, that if we deem it appropriate, we can make additions at any time throughout that process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is the staff's position. And I think that would be true not just for special education, but for the other categories as well that trustees may give consideration to, such as vice principals. Our view is that it's best to staff on the allocations now, and it provides maximum flexibility for the recommendations that staff may make later on throughout the process, as well as for any ideas that may come from trustees in that regard.
Thank you. I appreciate the part that answered my question and your preamble. For tomorrow, I suspect that we'll hear that again tomorrow. But that concludes my questions. I'll take the chair back, Trustee Earhart. And what has been our pattern, I will give you the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair. And through you, Chair, I did have one more question, and it is around areas where the FTE count that's being proposed is lower than this year. Can we get staff confirmation that within the system and vacancies that that these reductions are covered, like through attrition, or are we in a position where people will be told that they no longer have a position in our system? Thank you.
Through the chair, we're not at that point in the process to actually understand who is impacted. As was stated, we're at the very beginning stages of the process. So as we get these benchmark numbers approved, if they're approved tomorrow, then we start rolling it out to the individual schools so we understand the discrete impacts of those numbers and the potential impacts on staffing. Given the projections as they currently sit, it should be fairly flat in the system. But again, we don't have the discrete information to make that determination today.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have confirmation of how the impact system-wide for those where there are reductions being proposed here. Just to get that clarified one more time. Thank you through the chair.
And through the chair, the school by school allocation goes out after March break. And that'll give us a better insight into the discrete positions that become available or are declared surplus.
Through the chair, I just wanted to add, based on our historical retirements, we would expect that the decreases would be covered by attrition.
Okay, thank you. And just for confirmation, through the chair, we expect that it would be covered through attrition in all staff categories where it's proposed here. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And before I call for the vote, does any last speakers on the speakers list?
Yeah, Trustee Earhart, I had amendments to propose. Is this an okay time, Chair?
Yeah, we do the motion before it passes. I've been instructed, so
Okay,
Ms.
thank
Joseph
you.
Dowers, can I ask you to put it on the screen, please?
Yeah, through the chair, I'd like to propose around vice principals to begin. These are set out. This was discussed at our last special FBAC, and I am of the perspective that in this staffing process, we would want to maintain the current VP staffing levels, understanding that there may be reallocations within the system based on projections, but that my proposal is not to cut staffing vice principal elementary or vice principal secondary roles, understanding that the province does not fund us for these levels. I continue to maintain that we should have 1.0 VP at every school. But my proposal here is modest and consistent with what was discussed at special FBAC, which is to maintain the 24-25 levels as we have for the vast majority of positions across the system. I believe we've cut too deep in previous cuts and would ask my fellow committee members to consider this. And so for VP's elementary, 185 FTE, and for VP secondary, 161 FTE. I would further note that in previous years, we have added back to these levels midway, like partway through the process, but the stress we have caused our leaders at our schools, I feel I don't think we should put them through that. If we believe, if this committee and our board believes in these levels, I would ask that we please support them now. And thanks very much.
Okay, and I gather from what you offer, Trustee Rajwani, you're willing to second?
Yes, I'm going to second this motion.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. I anticipate reconvening at 6:15. So we're officially at recess. Thank you. We're about to come out of recess. We'll do a roll call just to confirm that we have quorum. Trustee DeVitas, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Earhart.
Here, thank you.
Trustee Lee. Welcome back to Trustee Lee. Trustee Rajwani. Trustee Patel.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Wong.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Trustee Shen.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Lee. And Trustee Rajwani. Okay, we will hope that they will join shortly, but we have enough for quorum in the interim, so we will resume. Trustee Earhart, this matter, including these numbers, or the motion that passed last Thursday at FBEC, talked about maintaining maintaining the status quo, which is what is currently in operation. That was passed at committee and will ultimately be determined by board tomorrow night. And as such, this is redundant and serves to meet the same objective. So this objective has already been decided by committee and is before formal board, special board tomorrow night. So I'm ruling that the motion is out of order.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I understand.
Okay, thank you. Was that the only motion you had tonight that you want to put?
It is for now. I see there's a question in the chat, however, Chair.
Okay, Trustee Shen, is this about is your question about? Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Trustee
yes.
Shen, but
Through you, Mr. Chair, just question the report that's in front of us for approval suggests reduction for vice principal and vice principals, right? So I'm not too sure how this would be. I mean, would that be contradictory to the motion if we approve the slate of positions that's being proposed here?
after talking with staff and confirming what we did previously, this is what's on the floor today is staff's position for the staffing that they're recommending for next year. It does not include that which was approved at committee last Thursday. And so that determination to add back will be decided by the full board at tomorrow's meeting. So I'm ruling this out of order because I don't think it's appropriate for the committee to make the same decisions on multiple times without going to the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question basically is, then what is being proposed today is not necessarily in line with what was moved at the last FPAC around vice principals. If this particular approval would mean reduction being approved. So anyways, I'm just questioning the logic behind this being ruled out of order for it being redundant, but the report itself that's before us for approval suggests potential reduction for vice principals. And so
right, in essence, and I'll let Associate Director Zucker in it, but in essence, they're suggesting a 100% of what they would like, what they believe is appropriate. At FBEC, we decided to add X. What's before the committee tonight is the 100% that staff is suggesting, and the X being added, the committee has already determined that that was appropriate and that board should consider that recommendation. So to make the recommendation tonight, again becomes redundant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Associate Director Zucker wanted in, I think.
I don't need to. I just, what's in the report is staff's recommendation. So trustees can vote against staff's recommendation, but the motion from Thursday will indeed bring the staffing levels for VPs up to the 185 and the 161.
So the numbers are the same as what will happen as a result of the motion that was passed last Thursday at FPEC. So the will of the board will happen tomorrow regarding this and whether the board determines to modify it but from committee, this issue has been addressed. Okay, so hearing no further motions, I'm going to ask for a mover and seconder for approval. Before we can vote on it, well, even regardless of how we intend to vote, we need to put it on the floor. So we need a mover and a seconder to open the vote.
Sorry, Chair. Trustee DeVitis, I can move the report.
Thank you, Trustee DeVitis. I need a seconder.
Trustee Earhart can second.
Trustee Earhart will second. Thank you. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustee Lee is against.
Shan against.
Trustee Patel, Trustee Rajwani, Trustee Wong.
Trustee Patel against.
Wong against.
Trustee Rajwani. We will mark her absent. Close the vote, please. And that is defeated.
So through the chair, just trying to get clarification. By voting against, we have no staffing to distribute out to the system for principals after March break. So just wondering if there's going to be further direction provided.
Thank you. And well, so maybe it would be helpful to the committee members for you to share the reality of what this vote means and the challenges it presents to the system moving forward, including the collective agreements we have in place and the notification requirements within it. Then it'll go to board. Can I do that? Okay. Can I pass the chair? I would like to pass the chair to Trustee Earhart.
Yeah, I'll take the chair.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. I would like to go on record as filing a minority report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take back the chair.
Okay.
Can either the director or the associate director reiterate for the committee the reality and the challenges that this presents contractually for us moving forward?
Thank you through the chair. So once this motion is passed or once the board approves school-based staffing, then work happens over March break in order for principals to be provided upon their return, their school-based staffing allocations. And then the principals do some work at the school level. And there's quite a bit of work that happens before we get to the collective agreement timelines. So I would turn to people and culture staff to determine if we don't do this or pass some numbers tomorrow, how the collective agreement timeline will be impacted.
Thank you, and through the chair. So returning from March break is when we typically do the staffing allocation rollout to elementary and secondary schools. March 17th for secondary and 18th for elementary respectively. And then that is in advance of the first phase of the surplus transfer process is determining school surplus teachers as per the ETT collective agreement, and that date is April 2nd. So that is less than 2 weeks to move forward with that process. And if we are not able to declare surplus as per the elective agreement, it does put us into a precarious position, especially if we're in a declining enrollment situation, which we are projected to be for the upcoming school year. It also delays the consultation process that needs to take place with school communities, school councils, around what their school organization will look like ahead of the many other processes that are regulated by collective agreements. So it is a significant challenge to not roll out after the March break. It's a very narrow window.
Okay, thank you. We will now go on to the next item, which is item 4.2, which is contract awards operations, which is on page 13 of the agenda. It's my understanding this is a single item pertaining to the Unleashing Learning conference. Director Latouche is presenting.
Thank you, and through the chair, I will turn to Anita, our senior manager who's online.
Thank you. Through you, the chair, we are presenting the contract awards just for operations for a sole source procurement to Beanfield Center. If there's any questions, I'd like.
Okay, thank you. I'll give trustees a moment online to share if they have any questions on this matter. Hearing and seeing none, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for approval, committee approval of this.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Trustee Aviti, second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just to be clear, because the documentation's a little, this is for receipt and we'll go to board tomorrow? Okay, thank you. Can we open the vote, please?
Trustees in favor?
Shan in favor.
Trustee Rajwani in favor.
Patel in favor.
Wong in favor.
And that carries. Thank you. The last item is adjournment. I want to thank trustees and staff for a great evening. And can I have a mover and seconder for adjournment, please?
Trustee Rajwani.
Trustee Rajwani, thank you.
Wong.
Trustee Wong, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Good night, everybody. Thank you.